Dear colleagues, our next briefing is crossed out from the community. MPs have deprived IDPs from their voting rights. Please welcome co-founder and coordinator of KrymSOS, Tamila Tasheva, East-SOS head Olexandra Dvoretska, and Right to Protection legal analyst Suleiman Mamutov. Good morning, dear colleagues. You know that there was a law that passed second hearing in the parliament yesterday. This law deprived all the IDPs from their voting rights at the upcoming local elections scheduled for this October. It is about more than 1.4 million people, voters. And this deprivation is against not just the constitution of Ukraine, but also the body of law of Ukraine, because besides Article 5 of the constitution, whereby the people of Ukraine is called the key carrier of the statehood, there is also a law on local self-government and self-governance that prevents discrimination of citizens due to the tenure, residential tenure. Add to here the law on IDPs, which guarantees voting rights for this category of people, and international standards applicable to internally displaced persons, which is actually a soft law that provides some governing principles of for IDPs developed by the UN. We do harbor a hope, though, that the president will veto this piece of legislation, because in such situation, when a substantial proportion of the population has found itself isolated from any chances of impacting the communities they finally settled. And by the way, these people have found their new communities in a forceful way, that is, they've never been asked about that. It's kind of migration, immigration that is carried out forcefully in otherwise peaceful time. And we would really like you to highlight this problem so that the rest of the society has no biased preconception as to how local self-governance is formed in this country. Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Olexandra Dvoretska, and I represent the Vostok-SOS Charity Foundation. Before coming to this press conference, we saw how this law was heard at the parliament. We checked for the discussion of the law in social networks and in the media. And I would really like to highlight certain myths regarding IDPs that circulate in the country. First of all, IDPs, and I maintain we are speaking about internally displaced persons. This flies in the face of some politicians who say that these are just temporarily relocated people. Many of these people will never be able to come back to their homeland, and they de facto are new members of communities in Kiev or in another area. And it appears that while we have these people, they are not integrated in territorial communities they now reside with. there is a certain uprooting for such IDPs because people no longer are connected to Lugansk or Donetsk or another residential area. Such persons have come to Kiev to use transportation, healthcare, educational services here, and the person has to find, say, kindergarten or school to his children. And these are areas controlled and managed by local councils and local territorial communities. And there is also another myth that such IDPs need to register according to the existing legislation. But again, the majority of them have already registered according to the current legislation, indeed, in accordance with applicable requirements. But then they lack this stamp in the passport that becomes the sore in the eye of many. But we need to understand that the current legislation we speak about effectively deprives IDPs of their IDP status as soon as they get this passport stamp. As soon as you, having come from Donetsk, get this stamp made in Kiev, you automatically cease to be IDP and lose all the benefits or assistance applicable to you as an IDP. Because of that, speculations that people have not been registered according to the legislation is another myth. Also, they say that such people have very poor understanding of local specifics, of local workings, but I can tell you that every IDP coming to a new location faces a pile of bureaucratic procedures, which is greater than normal, regular community members may never face in 5 years. Such persons need to stand in lines in all sorts of government authorities, and another important moment is that we have a tradition that we have never seen it in the history that a person without stamp and the passport was prevented from voting. I'm surprised at hearing this, that people registered in Dnipropetrovsk yet residing de facto in Kiev for years and years cannot exercise the voting right. Yeah, there were times when there was no suffrage, when black people were prevented from voting, but this is not a case to follow. We need to change our attitudes, and I think that IDPs are among the first to see local government work in favor of those residing in the community.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Tamila Tasheva. I'm coordinator of the KrymSOS organization now with ICA. What Sasha said, she also left the Crimea. Myself, when I visited in the social networks and my post, when I wrote that we are going to have a press conference today, they said, what's the problem? Let them go back to their nukes and parts and vote there. I can say only one thing, not the IDP represents IDPs who came here from Donetsk, Lugansk regions, or representatives who came here from the Crimea, specifically from the Crimea, first of all, because regretfully the occupation of the Crimea is kind of extending time, and those Crimean, former Crimea residents had to leave their dwellings and houses. It's hardly possible they come back there to vote. So to give them the possibility to vote is very important. What I would like to say again, and this law has again a lot of norms which really violate the constitution and the major laws of Ukraine, which Suleiman mentioned. Article 70 of the Constitution of Ukraine, they fix the norm according to which actually describe the circumstances under which a citizen of Ukraine can be deprived the right to vote. This person under 18 of age, underage, this is a non-resident Ukraine, or some kind of the disabled person, I mean mental disabled person is for the IDP. For this, they did not mention it. For us, social workers who work every day with many people, we represent institutions. We have offices in Kyiv, Lviv, and Kherson, and constantly, apparently, we travel over Ukraine and we communicate with those people who cannot possibly get back to their, let's say, residential areas. So this question, how they're going to live further on, is very important. Before us, there was an Alliance public organization reporting how the state authorities respond and help the IDPs to reintegrate. So this law will never be instrumental for the IDPs to be integrated into the new community which receives them. Only when they have the right to vote, when they can influence the local authorities, then they can be a full-fledged members of those community and integrate fully into that. Yesterday communicated, and actually I went with our lawyer to the Pushevaditsa, one of the compact residents of the IDPs, mostly from the Crimea, but also from the east of Ukraine. We knew that we were going to have the press conference, and we agreed that we were going to carry that during the night in Facebook when we came to know that that law was adopted. So my question was, and you know, there was community, kind of a lot of consultants, legal consultants. So we asked, maybe we are mistaken, maybe you do not have the right, you do not need the right to vote. They said, no, we do want to get this right to vote and to elect the local authorities. And they provide their explanation. And they said that we cannot come back to the Crimea. We would like to be full-fledged members of this community to decide our destiny ourselves. You know, so this is really very important for the IDPs to get to have the right to vote. So Alexandra was really touched by that, because many of the journalists, in many of journalists' publications or the speeches of the politicians, they mentioned not the IDPs, not the person who was internally displaced in this country, but they used the term the temporary IDP, temporary displaced person. This is perhaps one of those myths which had to be ruined, that those people were for some time only are displaced persons. We would like to show, to demonstrate the majority of IDPs, they do not have, they have nothing to return to. And according to the national legislation, to our fundamental law, the Constitution of Ukraine, and today we have a big time discussions, sir, take place about what kind of constitution we're going to have, and all the topics related to decentralization, etc., when we have to protect the rights of all the citizens of Ukraine, irrespective of where they used to live or where they are residing now, but really they would like to integrate in those communities which they live or join today. Thank you, Camila. Thank you, colleagues. Any questions? Ukraine Crisis Media Center. My question is addressed to Tamila, perhaps to Alexandra. What are the arguments for this law? Because in the Crimea we are not going to have elections in any case. Maybe it's not correct to compare the situation in the Crimea and in the Donbass area, because in Donbass we can at least theoretically imagine, though we understand that it's unrealistic to have the elections. Maybe there will not be taken and held there. But what about Crimea? Because we know for sure there will be no elections at all. Well, actually, we don't have any arguments in the specific respective. And look at the the speech. That was the deputy from the opposition bloc. I don't remember his name. But by the way, the opposition bloc actually is very much specific on the IDPs issue. They try to protect them. So we understand this kind of speculation regarding the IDPs and these related topics. But he started to talk that the IDPs has to be provided with the right to vote. Then Pravo stopped him and said, enough of those speculations, you can have the floor somewhere else, etc., etc. So he did not allow him even to end his speech. So the issue boils down to the following. Of course, the Crimeans are not going to return to elect the local authorities. The same pertains to the IDPs from the eastern parts of Ukraine, because despite the fact that let's say the pass system is rather good now, but most likely the elections will not be held in those regions which are not controlled by the Ukrainian government. And accordingly, the IDPs will not be able to go back to their former places of residence. So they are already moved here and they joined the community. So of course they would like to continue to live here. They have to be given the right to vote. I believe that the most active will be the voting will take place or will be regard to the most active parts of the IDPs or new community in Kherson or Kyiv region, etc. They fear that those people will be used as the tools of speculation during elections because according to official data, 1.4 million people, this is a big community which can be manipulated. Yes, they can do that, but this is not the issue in my mind whether to provide them with the right to vote or not. Under a situation when somebody can manipulate myself or anybody else, we have to make sure we are clear in the different question with this issue. I would like to add a few words. When we discussed that in the social network, there was some kind of comparison. They said they cannot go back to their home, and the Crimeans cannot have a vote. But also the inmates or jailbirds cannot vote during those elections, but physically they cannot get back to their, let's say, places of birth. You know, why this kind of comparison between the prison, let's say, the jailbirds or inmates and the IDPs can be compared? You know, I cannot understand why. Another story, those people who came here from the Crimea, they made their informed kind of choice. If they wanted to live in Russia, everything seemingly is good there, you know, so they would remain in the Crimea. Moving here are those who would like to live in their native country, continue to live here in their own country, Ukraine, and their children, they want their children to live here. Myself, for example, I cannot go to the Crimea, and the only thing which ties me with the incumbent authorities in the Crimea, and this criminal case, according to the events in the Maidan. So we can, we can manipulate the people, giving them the, let's say, they put some kind of porridge, buckwheat, grain, or something like that, which was the case in the eastern parts of Ukraine. The same can be done in the in Damascus area today. You were talking about the pass issuance system when you have to pay about 300 agreement to get that. So under those circumstances, it would be much easier to bribe the local residents who do not have any money at all, and not to take them, provide them buses to provide them the opportunity to vote, here. Next question. Alexandra Gandhi, Chernomorsk TV and Broadcasting.
There was information about human rights activists preparing alternative piece of legislation on IDP rights protection. Do you know something like that, or about who is doing it? I may be mistaken, but from what I know, there is some work done by the Opora network, given their long-standing professional engagement in election matters. We heard some initial information from them but it does require further specification in terms of connecting with organizations that do advocacy and lobbying certain positions. We've never been contacted before that, so maybe when we come to the discussion, debating phase, we'll probably know more about that. And one brief comment, it's not about IDPs that we forgot about in our new legislation. It is about 1,500 corrections suggested for this law that were announced at the Verkhovna Rada committee session, but they were ignored, largely ignored, and it was the thing that Opora network and election committee in Donetsk branch were involved with. But again, the corrections and amendments suggested for the draft legislation were not taken into account, and so maybe there is a piece of legislation developed out there, but we do understand there are practically no chances for it being finally adopted before the elections, the local elections, given the parliamentary holidays are coming quite soon. So thank you. Any more questions, specifications? If not, we have some question. I would still like to specify a technical thing. So an IDP registered with residential register in Kyiv or in Lviv, he does have a chance to vote. In the majority of cases, residential registration, whether in Kyiv or Lviv or elsewhere, is quite a complex task. Some people live in places where they cannot be officially registered at all. They really are concerned about these payments and benefits that they are entitled to as IDPs and its connection with registration. Yeah, an IDP authorized to be registered in Kyiv or Lviv, if the person has a stamp and passport, he will be able to take part in the elections. But from the past experience, given we've never seen a really cardinal migration reform throughout the time of existence of our state, we still see this residential registration system very much alive, and this really means certain restrictions of numerous voting rights. That is, we try to get rid of the previous residential administration system, but we just changed its name effectively without abolishing it altogether, to the extent that, say, a resident of Lviv who's come to Kyiv will not be able to vote here in Kyiv. And this, in my view, clearly connects to the lack of reform in this sphere. And I think, on the other hand, a person has to be able to decide the future of his residential area while being there. And there are some also other factors at play when someone willing a better life comes to the capital, to Kyiv. But again, the situation with IDP is another story. It is about people who had to flee war to save their life and livelihood, and the whole set of reasons is cardinally different. Without these circumstances, those people would simply use their voting rights where they were. And really, the stamp of registration is placed to IDP certificates. This is true, but the whole story lingered since, well, April or May last year. And we were really against having this stamp put in the passport. Why? Because for Crimean residents, say, will have big problems when with this Ukrainian stamp of residence of registration, if a person attempts to re-enter the Crimea. It would be a nightmare for him. Same goes about people resettled from Donetsk, from the east. This is also a personal safety and security consideration. Because of that, throughout all these discussions, we said that we were against, and we are against, these stamps in passports, because it may mean danger for such person. Thank you, Tamila. Any more questions? Okay, no questions. Thank you for coming.